Hi, I'm Maria George, and in my lessons about teaching language and literacy to children, in this video, I'll be talking about poetry. What is poetry? What can be learned through poetry? Different types of poetry, and how you can introduce poetry to children. So what is poetry? So poetry is defined as the type of literature or artistic writing that attempts to stir a reader's imagination or emotions. So poetry is a different style of writing, and all children should be exposed to different types of poetry, and so that way they can learn different things from the style of writing that they wouldn't with other styles. So what can children learn through poetry? Let me tell you 5 things that they could learn. So the first one is sound discrimination. Because poems are written in a different way and they're read a different way, sound discrimination by the reading of poetry can be learned through the poetry itself. Second, imagination. By writing words and phrases that illustrate emotions or different imagery, children can exercise their imagination. The third thing that they can learn is vocabulary and silly words, because some poems have some silly words in them. And then the fourth one is rhyming. And it's not all poems rhyme, but when they do, children can learn about rhyming words and rhyming styles. And then the fifth thing that children can learn through poetry is about different styles and types of poetry. There are many types of poetry, and I'm going to give you 5 types. So the first one is the lyric melodic. And this one is a descriptive poem that may have a song quality. An example that I thought of this is Hickory Dickory Dock. So Hickory Dickory Dock. The mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 1, the mouse ran down, hickory dickory dock. So it has a lyrical quality to it. It sounds almost like a song itself. And so these types of poems are called lyric melodic. And then a second type of poem is the narrative. And this one is one that tells a story or describes an event or a happening. And so an example that I thought of for this one was Little Miss Muffet. Remember that one? Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her curds and whey. Along came a spider and sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away. So this one could also be lyric because it has that lyrical quality, but it's telling a story. It's telling a story about Little Miss Muffet who was just eating, and then a spider came and scared her. And so it has a story element. And so this one can be categorized as narrative. A third type of poem is the limerick. And the limerick is defined as a poem that has 5 lines of verse set in a specific rhyming pattern that is usually humorous. So here, let me share one with you. Here's a famous limerick by Edward Lear, and it's called There Was an Old Man with a Beard. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." A fourth type of poem or poetry is free verse, and these usually do not rhyme. And spoken word is an example of this. I know that that is pretty popular now with different artists who do spoken word poetry, and these don't necessarily rhyme. They could be narrative, they could tell a story, or maybe they could even have a lyric melodic quality to it, but usually free verse poems do not rhyme. The fifth type of poetry is nonsense, and these are often ridiculous and whimsical. They don't make any sense, but they're fun and they're humorous to read. And so Shel Silverstein, he has written some nonsense poems, and he wrote a whole book on entitled The Runny Babbit. And so a lot of his poems in that book and sometimes in some of his other books are nonsense. So they're just fun and just lighthearted. So how can you introduce poetry to children? I'm going to give you 4 strategies. The first one is to have a poem of the day or of the week. So when I was teaching preschool, I would post up a poem of the week. And that way we could repeat that poem every day for about a week. And then by the end of the week, the children could easily recite it to me. And so that was one fun way to introduce poems to children. A second way is to read a poem and then have the children illustrate it. Just read a poem to the children about whatever subject, or even one of those nonsense ones, and then say, okay, draw a picture of what you think this poem is about. And it's fun to see what they come up with. A third way is to invite children to think of rhyming words to go with photos or pictures. So you can show them a picture of a cat and say, what's a word that rhymes with this? And then they'll think of, well, they'll first identify that that's a picture of a cat, and then they can tell you different words like bat, rat, hat, and other words that rhyme with the picture that they see. A fourth way that I really enjoyed using was to use music, because a lot of poetry becomes songs and they become the music that we listen to. And so just by having children listen to different songs, especially nursery rhymes and other children's songs, that they can be exposed and introduced to poetry that way. So make sure to include poetry when you're teaching children about literacy. Not only is it fun, but children can learn about the unique use of language, writing, and use of words.